Okay, hi everybody. My name is Amy Wilson. I'm going to be just like Philippa was talking about. I'm a practitioner in this world, so it's like I have done some research. Alif asked me to introduce myself. I like to work at the intersection of social change and compassion is what I like to work at, and I'm in the process of creating an empathy action collaborative. Or cooperative. Cooperative, kind of going together. I have nearly 2 decades of experience creating large culture shifts in the private sector and the public sector as a director of innovation at a management consulting firm on one side of the spectrum, but also director of innovation within the federal government, and studied that in a large way. And so I have been, since I wrote my book, to almost 2 years ago, which is wild to think, the book is called Empathy for Change, which is also the name of the organ. Oh, you have the book. Great. I can get it signed. You can sign it. Perfect. Hello. Here we are. So this is the best kind of crowd. I was like, like I said in my post, I was like, I'm going to be talking to people who are like kind humans like me, so I'm not that worried about like who I'm going to be presenting to. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about weaving community care with changing the system. And in the introduction to my book, I say this: although we're wired as humans to connect, we haven't been socialized or trained to cultivate empathy. For a long time, it has been generally accepted that some of us are inherently more empathetic than others, but new scientific and neurological research argues we can train our brains to be more empathetic. Others observe empathy is also a choice. But one thing is for certain: whether empathy is a skill to be acquired or a choice to be made, our future depends on our ability to harness it within ourselves and change for the better. Use a little bit of introduction into my world. So I have 3 parts to this story today. I'm going to be telling you some statistics that has been happening over the past 30, 40 to 40 years. There's a powerful tide that has been taking over our society as we know it, and these are some of the trends that we're seeing based on some scholars out there. In the past 40 to 50 years, narcissism is on the incline and empathy is on the decline, and been sharply declining in the past 10 to 15 years. Narcissism is seen as caring more about self, and ego is attached to that. Empathy, which I'll go in deeper into that later, is talking about how do you be in feeling with somebody as opposed to feeling for someone. So some reasons why this got down this path. Susan Conrath, who authored one of the studies, it says, the relationship between personality and culture is dynamic, with societal changes affecting empathy and changes in empathy feeding back into societal beliefs and norms. So she says that shifting attitudes and beliefs feed behaviors, decreased emphasis on others, and then changing expectations of success. So there's at least 4 studies here that specifically talk about that. Since the 1970s as well, 2 phenomena has been working against us. We are sorting ourselves with people who look and think like us, leading to homogenous communities, which is where the big sort is. They're becoming more different than each other. So those in cities tend to have more education, have higher paying jobs, and are single compared to those in rural areas with more blue collar jobs. It's been growing since the 1970s, and after World War II until the mid-70s, places were getting more alike. Now they're getting less alike, and one of those factors is political difference. So also in Bowling Alone, this book was written 20 years ago, but for the first 2/3 of the 20th century, a powerful tide bore Americans even to a deeper engagement into the life of communities. But a few decades ago, silently without warning, that tide reversed. And so we're going into a space where we're now like being more alone and lonely. So he points his finger at television and technology for the decline, and he says that A second predictor of the reason why we're going down this path is generational decline in almost all forms of civic engagement. And it was shaped by social habits and values during the Great Depression and World War II, but our latest generations have changed that. And I think I was looking at the slide, I was like, it's very ironic that I have the slide, it sits together and there's one dot. But the third book I'm bringing to the conversation today is just launched last year from the U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy. In his book, he explores the loneliness epidemic, especially during the pandemic. He says that loneliness is the subjective feeling of having inadequate social connections. This feeling has increased over past decades because people are more geographically mobile and thus are more likely to be living apart from friends and family. And more people report living alone today than any other time since the census began collecting this data. In the workplace, especially, new models of working such as telecommuting and some on-demand gig economy contracting agreements create flexibility for us. And so we're not together anymore. And a Pew Research study says that between 1985 and 2009, the average size of an American socials network is defined by the amount of confidants they have in the world, declined by 1/3, just over a generation. And the diversity of those people whom they discuss important matters has decreased. And 12% of people in the US in particular do not have people with whom they can discuss important things. So a lot of research are going to that place. The numbers that we're seeing is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, like the negative health benefits, and then also is more deadly than lack of exercise and climate change combined. So it's I'm painting a bleak picture here. However, what's next is part two, okay. Not part three, but the findings of all this show we are a deeply lonely country in need of human connection, that we haven't really cracked the code on how to find it. So opportunities like Philippa talked about, other things I'm getting ready to talk to you about, is also allowing us to have opportunities for us to create what Martin Luther King Jr. talks about, beloved community. He envisioned beloved community as a society based on justice, equal opportunity, and love for one's fellow human beings. And the organizations I'm going to be talking about and the work is doing a lot of work in the realm of systems change and weaving that future. But the thing is, even though I just painted a bleak picture, it allows us to give us some hope, because we have to, we can't just sit back and say, and that's what my entire book is about, is being like, we can't just sit back and be like, okay, this is happening to us. We have to step up and start doing something about it. So we must create the conditions that should exist. So for example, cultivating cultures of inclusion and belonging, building trusted relationships, and including collaboration and cooperation. So also what's interesting is that communities versus networks. And the definition of these is really interesting as far as what we look in and what we're looking at in the higher level of what society is telling us is, this definition on either side is from this public school teacher from New York City who was in the system for about 30 years, and he saw the challenges to the school system, and he wrote these main differences. And he said that a community is a place in which people face each other over time in all their human variety, good parts, bad parts, and all the rest. And some places promote highest quality of life possible, lives of engagement and participation. It's small and intimate, organic, and usually attached to a place. On the other side is networks, which we have been building more of in the world. And networks usually are large and anonymous and encourage passivity and consumption. So the bigger question we're trying to ask here is, how might we lean more towards the community side versus the network side, and how we redesign systems? So for more than a year, I've been working with this Cameroonian immigrant based out of Austin, Texas. His name is Rudy, and he has this company called Rufari, and it's really interesting. He had like that spark. I love working with entrepreneurs because like they have this spark of amazingness that happens in the world. And he says that, what we found is we both love gathering people over food, and we know that we can transform company culture and foster a deeper sense of connection and belonging and empathy where people work, live, and play. And he's been building these immersive culinary experiences and events, but we're looking at it in a more holistic way and looking at how to scale it, similar to some of the conversations that I've been thinking about and reading about in the books that and the conversations I've been having with folks. And what we're looking at is like gatherings where we can start connecting over dinner allows us to create opportunities to share stories and narratives from who we are and what might connect us together. We also can meet different people from different backgrounds and break down those preconceived beliefs about others. And you see that we believe that we also say we're more alike than we're different. And we can also find like-minded people. We can people who care about the same issues that we're talking about, and that creates kind of a ripple effect and also creates action into the world. And I love this amazing quote by Jose Andres, who talks about, he created the World Central Kitchen, another creative reaction to wild things that were happening in the world. And in response to the threat of the wall in Mexico during the Trump administration, he said, we should build longer tables, not higher walls. So, snaps to that. So I've been thinking, how might we build longer tables with a community as a focus, and what would we do if we transform the world with those ideas? So I think there's an interesting thing here. I look at storytelling as a key component to all of this, and that's central to everything that we do at Rufari. Every course is a different story that we're weaving in together. So we're actually looking at taking storytelling to change systems, and there's 3 ways that we do that. Stories help make, prop up, and bring down systems. And this is bringing in some concept from Ella Saltmarsh, who's from the UK. She wrote this piece that she talked about collective storytelling allows us to be applied to systems change, and story can be seen as light, as glue, and as a web. So stories can be a light to illuminate the pathways ahead, glue to band us together, and to re-author the web of narratives we live in a bigger way. And so what we're doing next is experimenting with these kinds of concepts on how might we bring different groups of people together to lead towards systems change in that bigger way. So we also have been seeing that there's a number of people who are quietly working in our neighborhoods and towns to weave deep connections and lead with love. So this is the focus of Weave, the Social Fabric Project from the Aspen Institute. They try to break down the problem of social trust that has been leaving Americans divided in many different spaces. So they do 3 different things as well. They support the weavers who are spreading trust and tackling important issues in the world. They lift up those voices. So, and then finally, they inspire new generations of people to be weavers within their community. So their mentality is not being like, we know what's best, but going to the weavers and connecting community and building weavers of people. So it's this community of community makers. It's a place where they're not recreating the wheel at the end of the day. They're bringing the change makers together to figure out what's next. And I also wanted to bring up Lead for America. I did deep research on this book, in my book around Lead for America. It's a nonprofit organization that's building stronger and more inclusive communities in taking diverse young leaders and putting them in local government roles and trying to give them the skills and resources to make change happen at the local level. So it's people right out of college who essentially send them back to their hometowns, and then they say, okay, you might not go to that big city, but we're going to send you to probably a smaller city. And what they do is it's all based on community care. So they bring communities together to help solve systemic issues facing them. So they have 3 pillars with that. They focus on what is called community revitalization. They do place-based work, and they're inspired by Baltimore Core and Community Renewal in Shreveport, Louisiana. They do deep, sustained involvement in the communities. So the 3 things that they do is education. So they do civics education for young leaders. Number 2, they create pathways and fellowships to go back to their hometowns. They're called pathways. And then finally, they have systems change. So they bring together different groups of people kind of as a big tent to kind of think about how might we change the system at that community level. Really amazing things that they're doing, and this convergent leaders framework is looking at different aspects of them as a leader, and on one side it's the self. That is, you have to kind of look at like, how am I getting myself ready and creating the foresight of what's coming? So having the intuition and also working on innovation, but looking in a space of possibility. So that's where like, what could be, how do we create more of a just system? And then also at the top, you focus on practice. So how might I be more of service to the people that I engage with? And then finally, it goes from self to the community is like, how do you turn your personal service into actual change that happens in the world? And really fascinating things that they've been working on. So I learned a lot from Maya Pace, who's the Chief Programs Officer. She had this to say when I was talking to her about care. This was her definition of care, but what is interesting and with their idea of that, of what community care is she said that community care is deeply powerful and transformative, and it lifts people up with deep love and accountability. So there's lots of stories that are just coming out from that work that just was launched 2 years ago. So this is actual part 3. And so that leads us to, what does this mean? Where there's early stages of work that's being done across the spectrum as far as like having a greater and broader understanding of well-being. And there's just much more awareness that's out there. So at the end of the day, for folks who are in this room, probably this is a moot point because talking about empathy and like what empathy really means. But in the context of our work, where it's about empathy is feeling with someone rather than for them. And what's interesting there is that in the space of when we're designing new spaces, we need to feel like we're designing with and not for. And so that we can get to a world where those people who are affected by the systemic problems that are challenging us, are now the world is designed by those people. So that's how it translates into my work. But empathy, when it comes to systems change, allows us to sense and intuit what the world needs, helps us to infuse this community care that we've been talking about, doing it with others, helping people feel seen and heard, and then also feel compassion for others and putting that into work. So that's when I think about weaving this community care into our work. These are the things that empathy allows us to do. And at the end of the day, I mentioned earlier I was a director of innovation for different things, but I don't like using the word innovation. When I announce myself, I don't usually say director of innovation, for things, because at the end of the day, for me, it's like a positive change. How are we making the world better by being here? And so I see that as empathy plus action. And how do we do that in my world around human-centered design, participatory design? How do you design with rather than for, and share power and agency with the people that you're designing with? And one amazing experience, amazing organization that I've also had the lovely privilege of working with is this organization called the Creative Reaction Lab. Antoinette Carroll is the CEO, president, and founder of it, and it's based in St. Louis, Missouri. She founded this lab as a creative reaction to a tragic event. So in her hometown of Ferguson, Missouri, Michael Brown was murdered. And so she was like, she wanted to chip away at that larger systemic problems that she could see. And as a true designer and an artist, she actually started saying, let's start challenging systemic racism through helping to redesign systems of oppression with the experiences, and had a whole framework that is now being turned into the Institute for Equitable Design and Justice. And it just started a month ago, and I'm one of the founding members of this institute. And over the next year or two, it's going to be kind of launched in a larger way. And Antoinette is in helming this work. And what Antoinette mentions is an abundance of empathy creates safety, confidence, power, and positive systemic impact. And you can't get, that's what we're looking for. We're hoping to get more compassion in the end of the day. And then one thing I wanted to mention, is that I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. Who knows what this is? Anybody? Have you seen it in the past week? Okay, nobody. All right, I'm showing something you haven't seen. Okay. So I'd be remiss in saying this. This is cutting edge work. This is coming just last week. The Surgeon General, Dr. Murthy, mentioned him earlier together with the One.Dot. His team launched the Framework for Mental Health and Well-Being. And this is two basic feelings. At the top, it's looking at safety and security. And the 5 core areas are here. I highly recommend, hopefully we can share the slides and you can look at it, or you can just Google it. I'm sure it will pop up. But this framework is just being launched. And on top of the other things I was just sharing, there's a lot of interesting and kinetic energy happening in different cultures around the US and even the world that is making us rethink and refactor what does work, what does place, what does home look like. So to end everything, I just want to leave with a lovely sentiment by Jenny Anderson. She did this wonderful article in the Atlantic where she really, I think, hit the nail on the head on what I think community really is. And community is about a series of small choices and everyday actions. It's investing in somewhere instead of trying to be everywhere. And then finally, communities are built like Legos, one brick at a time. And there is no hack. And so at the end of the day, we must measure our success by whether the people we care about also love us back, and vice versa. And are we trying to create more community rather than division, and more community care versus separation? So it's a choice, just like empathy is a choice in many different research that we're doing, and also we can cultivate those things and put action into our own hands. So just wanted to share one quick thing for folks. I just relaunched my podcast this week. So if anybody is interested in learning and going deeper into empathy, I have a co-host that's pretty wonderful. That's taking the concepts that I found and work in my book and the people that I engage with and find in the world, and I bring them into it. And we're talking about current events and things like that. So I would love to have you all, listen in and also suggest topics because we got lots of things popping up. So anyway, so this is how you can stay in contact with me if you want to, chat some more about like who I am as a person. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. I feel like, the community building is like Legos, one brick at a time. And I feel like, have you watched the Lego movie? Anybody? Those guys, they're like, yeah, we need a spaceship. And then somebody picks up a wheel and then jumps on it and they build the vehicle as they fly. I think that's what we are doing here in a way. We're finding our own way, own tools and mechanisms. So thank you so much for that wonderful presentation.
Yeah.
We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions before we move into our next session. Or any comments? I'm sure there's a lot, but it is,
Oh yeah, shared. I probably fed through a fire hose on all the stuff I just gave you.
Yes,
The options.
So this is a great overview. When are you coming up with the workbook?
Well, do I talk into this? Okay.
Yes,
So I'm actively working on 2 things that are going to be announced very soon. One thing that's already happening is I have a support group called Healing from Work. And I've been actively over the past 8 months building a workbook and testing it out with the support group, right? Because it's like looking at the place of like, you need to heal from past big T trauma, little T trauma, so that you can build community. And it's like, that's the whole point behind it. And then the cooperative is splitting off, and now we're going into more action rather than talking about what the problem is. And the second thing I'm working on with a friend who is a master storyteller is called How to Be Human at Work. And it's going to be a longer term strategy. So workbook, I can probably put a workbook together too. So yeah, I got a lot of things that I'm trying to do, but yes. Thanks.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, then perhaps we can wrap this session
Okay,
up. Thank you so
perfect.
much,
Thank
Amy.
you.